6 miles under the Pacific, something knocked on the hull of a United States Navy station, and it was not being polite. Sonar technician Danny Ford dropped his coffee. Master Chief Frank Doyle did not even blink. "They picked the wrong ocean," he muttered, cracking his knuckles. Somewhere above them, a commander was already reaching for a phone he prayed he would never have to use. If you love a good underdog fight, hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Now let's dive into this journey, because 6 miles down, the aliens are about to learn why humans never explore the deep sea unarmed. Trident Station sat on the floor of the Mariana Trench like a steel tick clinging to the belly of the planet, humming quietly while the rest of the world slept above it. It was officially listed on Navy paperwork as an experimental deep-sea research and salvage outpost, and unofficially known by everyone stationed there as the Can, because living inside it for 6 months straight felt exactly like being sealed in one. Commander Jack Reynolds ran the place with the calm exhaustion of a man who had long since stopped being surprised by anything the ocean threw at him. He had survived typhoons, equipment failures, and one unforgettable week when the galley ran out of coffee, which nearly caused a mutiny. He liked his crew small, sharp, and a little bit strange, because normal people did not volunteer to live at the bottom of the sea. His sonar technician, Danny Ford, was 26 years old, sharp-eyed and permanently jittery from drinking more coffee than any human body was designed to process. His engineer, Pete Callahan, could fix almost anything with a wrench and a bad attitude. And then there was Master Chief Frank Doyle, a man built like a submarine hatch, who had been diving in hostile waters since before half the crew was born. Doyle did not talk much. When he did, people listened, mostly because he was terrifying and partly because he was usually right. The morning it all changed started like any other. Ford was watching the sonar display, half asleep, sipping his 4th cup of coffee when a shape drifted across the return that should not have existed. It was smooth, symmetrical, and moving against the current, which meant it was not a whale, not a squid, and definitely not a rock formation. "Commander," Ford said, sitting up straight for the first time in an hour, "I've got something out there." "It's not marine life." Reynolds walked over, arms crossed, studying the blip crawling steadily closer. "Debris field, old sub-wreck?" "No, sir, it's moving on its own. And it's headed straight for us." Doyle appeared in the doorway without anyone hearing him come in, which he always seemed to manage despite being roughly the size of a small refrigerator. "Something's out there," he said flatly, "and it ain't Navy." Reynolds ordered the outer lights raised, and for a long, tense minute, nothing happened except the slow hiss of recycled air and the pounding of Ford's heart against his ribs. Then the object came into view outside the reinforced viewport, and every person in that room went completely silent. It was a probe, roughly the size of a delivery van, covered in strange plating that shimmered faintly even in the dim water, with 3 glowing sensor clusters that rotated slowly. Scanning the station from top to bottom like a curious tourist, inspecting a museum exhibit. It made no attempt to communicate. It simply floated there, studying them. "That is not one of ours," Callahan said, stating the obvious with the particular tone of a man who desperately wished it wasn't true. Doyle stepped closer to the viewport, arms folded, watching the probe with the same expression he used when a rookie diver did something monumentally stupid. "Whatever that is," he said, "it thinks nobody's home down here." Reynolds keyed the comm to Pacific Fleet Command, requesting immediate identification on an unregistered object at their coordinates. The response took 11 minutes, an eternity when a hostile probe is parked outside your window, and when it finally came through, it offered no comfort at all. Nothing matching that description existed in any known inventory, allied or otherwise. That was when the probe extended a thin mechanical arm, pressed it against the station's outer hull, and began, very calmly, to cut through solid reinforced steel. Alarms tore through Trident Station, red light bathing every corridor, and for the first time in years, Jack Reynolds felt something he had almost forgotten the taste of: real fear. 6 miles beneath the surface, with nowhere to run and no one coming fast enough. Doyle grabbed the heaviest wrench off the tool rack like it was a butter knife. "Well," he said, cracking a small, dangerous grin, "guess it's time to say hello properly." Nobody in that station had any idea that this quiet, curious little probe was only the very first knock on the door, and that somewhere far above the waves. An entire alien fleet was about to learn a lesson the hard way about exactly what lived at the bottom of Earth's oceans. The cutting arm sliced halfway through the outer hull plate before Doyle reached it, and without a second of hesitation, he swung the wrench in a full arc and caved in the probe's sensor cluster like a tin can. Sparks sprayed through the water outside the viewport, and the mechanical arm jerked backward, retracting in what almost looked like surprise. "Report," Reynolds barked, watching pressure gauges climb toward levels nobody wanted to see. "Breach is minor, sir, we can patch it," Callahan shouted, already hauling a sealant kit toward the damaged section. But that thing wasn't just scanning us. It was trying to get inside. The wounded probe drifted backward, its remaining lights flickering erratically, then shot upward into the darkness and vanished. For a moment, everyone allowed themselves to believe the danger had passed. It had not. 20 minutes later, Ford's sonar display lit up with something far larger, far heavier, and moving with a discipline that told everyone in the room this was no accident and no coincidence. "Commander, I've got multiple contacts inbound, big ones in formation." Reynolds felt his stomach drop. "How many?" "I'm counting 6. No, wait, 8. They're spreading out around us." Doyle peered over Ford's shoulder at the display, jaw tightening. "That's not recon anymore. That's a landing party." Within minutes, massive shapes settled onto the sea floor surrounding Trident Station in a loose ring, each one deploying stabilizing legs that dug into the silt like a spider taking up position. Then, one by one, hatches opened, and armored figures began emerging into the crushing black water, moving with the strange, gliding confidence of creatures who clearly believed they had nothing left to fear. The lead figure activated a translation device, and a cold, buzzing voice filled the station's outer hull sensors, easily picked up by the internal comm array. "Unidentified structure, you occupy Ithran-conquered salvage territory. This world's depths were surveyed as unclaimed. Submit your resources for immediate collection." Reynolds keyed the response channel, keeping his voice level despite his racing pulse. "This is United States Navy Installation Trident Station. You are trespassing on sovereign territorial waters. Withdraw immediately." There was a pause, then something that almost sounded like amusement crackled through the translation. "Species designation confirmed as primitive surface dwellers. Surface dwellers do not possess deep ocean assets. Compliance is advised." Doyle leaned toward the comm, unable to help himself. "Buddy," he said, "you just parked your whole fleet on top of the U.S. Navy's front porch." The alien voice did not respond to that directly, but the armored figures outside began advancing toward the station's docking collar, weapons igniting with a pale blue glow that lit up the black water like ghostly lanterns. Reynolds ordered general quarters, and the small crew scrambled into positions that had never once been tested against an actual enemy, because nobody at Trident Station had ever expected to need them. Ford grabbed a sidearm with shaking hands. Callahan armed himself with a cutting torch because it was the closest thing resembling a weapon within reach. Doyle simply rolled his shoulders, grabbed a heavy dive spear gun off the wall rack, and walked toward the docking hatch like a man heading out for a stroll. The first alien breached the outer hatch, and Doyle put a spear clean through its shoulder plating before it took a second step. The creature staggered backward, letting out a sound the translator did not even attempt to convert, and collapsed against the bulkhead. "They weren't expecting resistance," Callahan shouted over the chaos, torch blazing as he welded a support brace across the buckling inner door. "Look at them, they're barely reacting. They've never fought anybody who lives down here," Doyle said, reloading the spear gun with brutal efficiency. "That's about to change real quick." More armored figures pushed through the breach, and the corridor became a tight, brutal fight in cramped steel hallways where there was nowhere to retreat and no room for hesitation. Ford fired his sidearm with more panic than accuracy, but panic kept him alive, and that was enough for now. Reynolds coordinated from the command deck, sealing sections of the station to slow the advance while broadcasting an emergency distress signal up through the relay buoy to Pacific Fleet Command. The response came back fast this time, and it was the first genuinely good news anyone at Trident Station had heard all day. Trident Station, this is Pacific Fleet Command. We have your distress call. Reinforcements are already inbound. Hold position. Help is on the way. Reynolds allowed himself one short breath of relief before the docking collar groaned under a heavier impact and through the reinforced viewport. He saw something far larger surfacing from the alien formation outside, a shape built for one purpose only, and it was aiming directly at the heart of the station. The new alien shape was easily 3 times the size of the landing craft already surrounding Trident Station, its hull ridged with weapon ports that pulsed with slow, hungry light. A commanding figure emerged from it, wearing armor plated in gold trim that marked him apart from the rest, moving with the deliberate arrogance of someone who had never once lost a fight in his life. The translation device crackled again, this time carrying a voice sharper and colder than before. This is Fleet Marshal Threx of the Ithren Conquered. Your resistance has been noted and will be corrected. Surrender the installation, or it will be reduced to debris. Reynolds gripped the comm, jaw tight. Marshal, you've got a funny way of introducing yourself. This is United States sovereign territory, and we don't hand over Navy property to anybody. There was a pause, then something almost like genuine confusion filtered through the translated voice. Records indicate this species lacks advanced defensive capability. Explain your continued resistance. Doyle, still covered in scorch marks from the corridor fight, leaned toward the comm with a tired grin. Records are wrong, pal. Real wrong. Threx did not appreciate the response. Weapon ports along his flagship's hull began charging, and Reynolds watched helplessly as pressure readings across the station spiked into dangerous territory. All hands brace for impact, he shouted, and a second later the first strike hit. The station rocked violently, metal groaning under the strain, lights flickering as an entire support strut buckled near the eastern module. Callahan was thrown sideways into a bulkhead, torch clattering from his hand, while Ford grabbed the edge of his console just to stay upright. "We can't take another hit like that," Callahan shouted, scrambling back to his feet, blood trickling from a cut above his eyebrow. "Structural integrity is failing on deck too." Reynolds keyed the fleet channel again, voice steady despite the chaos around him. "Command, Trident Station is taking direct fire. We need that support now, not later." "Copy, Trident Station, hold on. Kraken is deploying." Ford blinked through the smoke, confused. "Kraken." "Sir, what's Kraken?" Reynolds allowed himself the smallest, grimmest smile of the entire day. "You're about to find out, son." Outside in the crushing black water beyond the failing station lights, something massive stirred inside a reinforced launch bay, bolted to the trench floor half a mile away. A bay that had been quietly built years earlier under a program so classified, most of the crew had never even heard its name mentioned. Thick doors split apart, releasing a burst of pressurized air, and from within emerged a heavily armored combat exosuit the size of a small tank. Its outer plating designed specifically to withstand crushed depths that would flatten a submarine. Inside its cockpit, strapped in tight with a headset clamped over his ears, sat Master Chief Frank Doyle's oldest friend and diving partner, a broad-shouldered veteran named Senior Chief Marcus Whitfield, who had spent the last 2 years training exclusively to pilot this exact machine for exactly this kind of nightmare scenario. "Trident Station, this is Kraken 1, Whitfield's voice rang out over the comm, calm as a man ordering breakfast. "I hear you've got some uninvited guests. Let's go show them some hospitality." The exosuit surged forward through the black water with startling speed. Twin mechanical arms unfolding weapons that had been designed by Navy engineers, specifically to punch through alien hull plating. And it closed the distance toward Threx's flagship with terrifying purpose. Threx's sensors registered the incoming contact, and for the first time since arriving in Earth's ocean, something in his posture shifted, just slightly, from arrogance toward uncertainty. "New contact detected," a subordinate voice reported through the alien channel. "Mass and speed profile inconsistent with prior species assessment." Threx straightened, weapon systems already redirecting. "Recalculate. Nothing this species possesses should challenge a conquered flagship." Whitfield brought Kraken 1 in low along the sea floor, using the trench's natural terrain for cover exactly as he had trained for. and when he finally rose up directly beneath one of the smaller landing craft. He drove a mechanical fist straight through its underside hull, with a force that sent alien troopers tumbling out into the crushing water in a chaotic cloud of bubbles and debris. Back inside Trident Station, Ford watched the exterior sensor feed with wide eyes as the enormous machine tore into the alien formation. "Sir," he said slowly, "I think we're winning." Doyle, still bleeding from a shallow cut along his forearm, allowed himself a short, satisfied laugh. "Kid," he said, "we haven't even started winning yet." Above them, Threx's flagship turned its full weapons array toward the approaching exosuit. And everyone watching knew the real fight had only just begun. Kraken 1 absorbed the first blast across its reinforced shoulder plating, staggering backward through a cloud of displaced silt, but it did not go down. Whitfield gritted his teeth against the jolt rattling through the cockpit and pushed the machine forward again, closing the distance before Threx's flagship could line up a second shot. "Trident Station taking fire, but I'm still standing," Whitfield reported, voice tight with effort. "This thing hits like a freight train." "Copy, Kraken 1, Reynolds answered from the command deck, watching the exterior sensor feed with white-knuckled focus. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Threx's voice crackled furiously across the open channel, no longer sounding calm or amused. "Impossible. No surface species deploys combat assets of this scale. Identify this weapon platform immediately." Whitfield keyed the translated channel himself, allowing a tired, confident grin to creep into his voice. "Name's Kraken, Marshal. Figured somebody ought to introduce myself before I ruin your whole day." Threx ordered his remaining troops to converge. And armored Ithran soldiers swarmed toward the exosuit from multiple directions, weapons blazing pale streaks of light through the black water. Whitfield twisted the machine sideways, using its bulk as a shield, and swept one arm through the nearest cluster of troopers, scattering them like leaves in a storm. Inside Trident Station, the fight had not stopped either. A fresh wave of Ithran soldiers pushed through the weakened docking collar, and Doyle met them head-on in the narrow corridor. Spear gun discarded now in favor of a fire axe ripped straight off the emergency rack. "Chief, there's too many," Ford shouted, firing his sidearm until it clicked empty. "There's exactly enough," Doyle growled, swinging the axe with brutal precision, catching an alien trooper across the chest plating hard enough to send him crashing backward into two others behind him. Callahan grabbed a fire extinguisher and blasted a cloud of freezing chemical directly into the advancing soldiers' sensor visors, and for a few precious seconds. Half the boarding party stumbled around blind, swinging wildly at nothing. "Not exactly Navy issue tactics," Reynolds called out over the chaos, sealing another bulkhead behind the retreating aliens to buy his crew more time. "But I'll take it." Outside, the battle around Kraken 1 had grown desperate on both sides. Threx's flagship circled for another firing position, but Whitfield anticipated the move. Using the exosuit's thrusters to drop low along the trench floor and disappear into a cloud of churned silt before rising directly beneath the flagship's weakest structural point, right where its main weapon array connected to the hull. "Kraken 1, what's your status?" Reynolds asked, watching the sensor feed lose the exosuit's signal entirely in the murky cloud. Static answered him for 3 agonizing seconds. Then Whitfield's voice returned, strained but alive. "Status is, I'm about to make Marshal Threx very unhappy." With both mechanical arms braced against the flagship's undercarriage, Whitfield triggered the exosuit's full thruster output, driving upward with every ounce of force the machine could generate, and the flagship's hull groaned under stress it had never been engineered to withstand from below. Threx's voice exploded across the alien channel, no longer composed at all. "Structural failure imminent, evasive maneuvers immediately," but it was already too late. The weapon array tore loose from the hull in a violent spray of sparks and debris, crippling the flagship's primary offense in a single devastating strike, and the enormous vessel lurched sideways, venting atmosphere in thick silver bubbles that streamed upward through the black water like a wounded animal gasping for air. Inside Trident Station, the alarms briefly quieted as the boarding party, cut off from reinforcement and orders alike, hesitated in the corridor for the first time since the fight began. Doyle lowered his axe slightly, breathing hard. Sweat and grime streaked across his face. "That's it," he said, watching the confusion ripple through the remaining troopers. "That's the moment." They're done. But 6 miles above, in the cold silence of open ocean, something far larger than Threx's flagship was already descending toward Trident Station. Drawn by the distress, calls now crackling across every frequency the Ithren conquered possessed, and the true final battle for the deep sea had not even begun yet. The remaining boarding party inside Trident Station finally broke, retreating back through the shattered docking collar in a disorganized scramble. Several of them abandoning weapons entirely in their haste to escape the axe-wielding Master Chief who had, by this point, earned a reputation among the survivors that would follow the conquered for generations. "They're falling back," Callahan shouted, coughing through a haze of extinguisher chemical and smoke. "Seal that collar the second the last one's through," Reynolds ordered, already moving toward the command deck to check on Whitfield's status. "Ford, get me eyes outside now." Ford's hands were still shaking, but he pulled up the exterior sensor feed anyway, and what appeared on it made his stomach drop all over again. Threx's crippled flagship was retreating upward, venting atmosphere and trailing debris, but behind it, descending slowly from the darkness above, was something enormous. A vessel dwarfing everything the Conquered had brought so far, its hull lined with weapon batteries that made the flagship look like a child's toy by comparison. "Sir," Ford said quietly, "I don't think that's a rescue ship." Reynolds stared at the display, jaw tightening. "Command, this is Trident Station. We have a massive contact inbound, and it looks like the real fight just showed up." Whitfield's voice cut through the tension, tired but steady. "I see it, too. That thing's twice the size of anything we've fought so far." A new voice emerged over the alien channel then, deeper and colder than Threx's had ever been, carrying the unmistakable weight of actual command authority. "This is Grand Marshal Vesic of the Ithren Conquered Expeditionary Fleet. Your defiance has cost this operation considerable resources. That ends now." Doyle, limping slightly from a bruised leg but very much still standing, leaned toward the nearest comm panel. "You Conquered folks sure do love giving speeches before you lose." Vesic's flagship opened fire without further warning, unleashing a barrage that lit up the black water in a blinding wall of energy, forcing Whitfield to throw Kraken 1 into a desperate evasive roll along the trench floor. Debris and silt exploding around the exosuit as blast after blast tore into the seabed, where he had been standing seconds earlier. "I can't take a direct hit from that thing," Whitfield reported, voice tight with strain. "One clean shot and I'm done," Reynolds thought fast, scanning every system readout still active on the station. "Whitfield, listen to me. Trident Station has an emergency ballast system built for controlled seismic testing. If we vent it all at once near their position, we can kick up enough silt and shockwave to blind their targeting completely." "That's a hell of a gamble, Commander," Whitfield answered. "It's the only card we've got left," Reynolds said. "Doyle, get to the ballast controls. Ford, target their exact position and feed it to Whitfield the second we blow it." Doyle moved fast for a man his size, reaching the emergency control panel and slamming the override sequence while Callahan braced the failing support strut nearby, praying it held one more time. Ford fed coordinates to Whitfield with steady hands now, the earlier panic burned away by pure necessity. "On my mark," Reynolds said, watching Vesic's flagship line up its next devastating shot. 3, 2, 1, blow it." Doyle slammed the release, and Trident Station's ballast tanks vented in a massive, thunderous shockwave that tore through the black water, throwing up an enormous wall of churned silt and debris directly across Vesic's targeting sensors. The flagship's next volley fired blind, missing Kraken 1 entirely and scoring a glancing blow across its own escort vessel instead. Whitfield seized the opening without hesitation, driving Kraken 1 straight through the chaos and slamming both mechanical fists directly into the flagship's primary sensor, array with everything the exosuit had left to give. Sparks exploded outward, and the massive vessel's weapon systems flickered and died in a cascading failure that spread across its entire hull. Vesic's voice returned to the channel, no longer commanding, no longer cold, carrying instead the unmistakable tone of a commander realizing he had badly misjudged everything about this world. Sensor and weapon systems critical. Withdraw remaining forces immediately. Threx's damaged flagship and Vesek's crippled command vessel both began a slow, humiliating retreat upward through the black water. Abandoning the scattered wreckage of landing craft and troopers, still drifting near Trident Station's damaged hull. Inside the command deck, Reynolds finally allowed himself to exhale, watching the alien contacts fade from the sonar display one by one. Kraken 1 status report. Whitfield's voice came back, exhausted but unmistakably proud. Banged up, Commander, but Kraken's still standing. And so is your station. Doyle wiped grime from his face and managed a tired, satisfied grin. Guess the Navy's got a new record now, he said. First time anybody's ever thrown an alien fleet off American property using a seismic testing system and a bad attitude. By the time Pacific Fleet Command's rescue vessels finally reached Trident Station, the water around it had gone quiet again, littered only with scattered wreckage and the slow drift of abandoned alien equipment settling into the silt. Commander Jack Reynolds stood at the damaged docking collar, watching the recovery teams pull in the last of the debris, and felt the particular exhaustion of a man who had just survived something no Navy manual had ever prepared him for. Master Chief Frank Doyle sat nearby on an overturned equipment crate, nursing a cup of coffee that tasted burnt and lukewarm and was, in his opinion, the best cup of coffee he had ever had in his life. Senior Chief Marcus Whitfield climbed out of Kraken 1's battered cockpit, helmet tucked under one arm, grinning despite a fresh bruise blooming along his jaw. You know, Whitfield said, dropping onto the crate beside Doyle, when they told me I'd be piloting an experimental deep-sea combat suit, I figured worst-case scenario was a training accident. Nobody mentioned actual alien invasion. Doyle handed him the coffee without a word, and Whitfield accepted it gratefully. Danny Ford leaned against the sonar console, still slightly pale but grinning now, the adrenaline finally starting to fade. Chief, is it always like this down here? First time for everything, kid, Doyle said. Ask me again in 6 months. Pete Callahan wandered past, already assessing the hull damage with the tired satisfaction of a man who knew he had weeks of repair work ahead of him and did not particularly mind. Structural integrity's holding, he reported to Reynolds. We'll need a full refit, but she'll live. Reynolds nodded, watching the recovery ships above finish sweeping the debris field. Command's going to want a full report on this. I have a feeling nobody up top is going to believe half of it. 3 weeks later, a formal Navy inquiry was filed, and true to Reynolds's prediction, several senior officers openly questioned whether Trident Station's crew had experienced some kind of shared deep-sea delusion. Right up until recovered alien wreckage was quietly transferred to a research facility for study, at which point the tone of every meeting changed rather quickly. Pacific Fleet Command classified the entire event, publicly listing it only as an unscheduled seismic testing incident with minor equipment damage. Doyle found that description particularly funny and made sure to repeat it every chance he got. The Ithran Conquered filed their own report far above the waves, though it took considerably longer to complete. Since Fleet Marshal Threx spent most of that time explaining to his superiors why a supposedly primitive surface species had crippled 2 conquered vessels using what their own sensors eventually identified only as a large armored diving suit and an underwater seismic device. Grand Marshal Vesek's account of the engagement was even shorter, consisting mostly of a single updated advisory quietly added to Conquered survey logs, warning all future expeditions that Earth's oceans were, contrary to prior assessment, very much occupied, very well defended, and not worth the trouble. Back at Trident Station, repairs moved quickly, and within 2 months the outpost was fully operational again, its damaged docking collar reinforced, its ballast system upgraded, and a brand new plaque mounted proudly near the command deck reading, in simple stenciled letters, "Home of the Kraken." Whitfield insisted on hanging it himself, and Doyle insisted on being the one to hold the ladder, mostly so he could take credit for it later. Reynolds stood beneath that plaque one quiet evening, looking out through the reinforced viewport at the dark, endless water beyond, and found himself smiling despite everything the last few months had cost him. 6 miles down, in the crushing black silence of the deep sea, a small crew of ordinary sailors had faced down an alien fleet that assumed Earth's oceans were empty, undefended, and easy pickings, and had proven, beyond any doubt, exactly how wrong that assumption was. Doyle joined him at the viewport a moment later, coffee in hand as always. Watching the same dark water with the calm confidence of a man who had already decided nothing down here could surprise him anymore. "Reckon they'll be back?" Ford asked from behind them, still a little nervous even now. Doyle took a slow sip of his coffee and shrugged. "Let them come," he said. "The Kraken's not going anywhere, if you enjoyed watching the U.S. Navy remind an alien fleet exactly why nobody messes with the deep sea. Make sure to like this video, subscribe for the next chapter, and drop a comment telling me what you want Doyle and the crew of Trident Station to face next. Share this with anybody who loves a good underdog story, because the ocean has plenty more secrets left to tell.